The sun was red and low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dry alien land. The girl's wrists were raw and bleeding, tied by rough chains that cut into her pale skin. She was not human. That was clear by her strange eyes and soft glowing veins. Her armor was broken, her body weak, and her heart crushed by betrayal. Her own team had left her behind. They had fought side by side, trained together, shared meals and stories. But when the mission failed, they chose to run. They didn't just leave her. They chained her to a stone and vanished into the fog. She screamed at first, calling their names, but no one answered. She kicked and cried and pulled. But the chains were strong. Time passed, and her voice grew thin, her arms heavy. The wind blew sharp dust into her face, and she coughed weakly. She was thirsty, starving, and every bone in her body hurt. Her eyes stayed open because she feared closing them meant never waking up. That's when the sound came. Footsteps, not alien boots, not the machines her people used, but soft, slow human steps. She turned her head with great pain, blinking away the blur. A shadow stood on the ridge above, silhouetted by the dying sun. He looked ordinary for a human, rough clothes, a pack on his back, and a weapon slung over his shoulder. He paused when he saw her, eyes narrowing, unsure if she was a threat or a trick. But then he saw the chains, the blood, the way her hands trembled. She wanted to speak, to ask for help, but her throat was dry and broken. All she could do was look at him, pleading, begging, silent, and somehow that look said everything. The man took a cautious step forward, then another. He didn't rush, didn't speak. He moved slowly, watching the rocks, checking for traps. But when he reached her, his face changed. He saw the bruises, the deep gashes, the marks of torture, not war, but betrayal. "Who did this to you?" he asked softly. She blinked, barely understanding the words. Her lips moved, but no sound came. The man knelt beside her and gently touched the chain. "Hold still," he said, pulling a small tool from his belt. With careful hands, he worked on the lock. It was old tech, not something humans used, but he had seen similar before. Click by click, he opened the lock, and the chain slipped loose from her wrist. She gasped, the sudden freedom feeling strange and painful. Her arms dropped to her sides. Useless for now, he freed her ankles next, and she collapsed into his arms. He caught her gently, his strong arms holding her light body with ease. "Easy, I've got you," he whispered. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. She hadn't been held like that since she was a child. It felt wrong, and it felt right, all at once. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, as he lifted her up. She was light, too. Light, her body starved, her muscles gone. He started walking, careful with each step. The sky turned darker, and the wind grew colder. She rested her head on his shoulder, still weak, still scared. Why was this human helping her? Why didn't he ask who she was or what she had done? She had no answers, only more questions. Behind them, in the fading light, something moved. Far on the rocks, eyes watched, metal gleamed. Whoever had left her wasn't finished yet, and the human had just made himself part of her story. But for now, he didn't know that. He only saw someone in pain, someone left behind, and he had made a choice to help her, even if it meant danger, even if it meant war. He didn't ask her name, and she couldn't tell him. But in that moment, something powerful passed between them. Not love, not yet, but something strong, something human. She closed her eyes as he carried her through the dust, and for the first time in days, she felt a little safe, a little warm, a little free. He didn't know why he was doing it. He should have walked away like any smart man would, but something about her eyes half closed, lost, and hurting pulled at something deep inside him. The desert was not a place for mercy, not for strangers, not for aliens, but still, here he was, carrying a nearly lifeless alien girl through the burning land. Her skin was cooler than it should be, her breathing faint. She was barely holding on. The scars on her arms were fresh, not from battle, but from chains that had cut through her like she was nothing. He stopped beneath a rock outcrop and lowered her gently. The wind had picked up, dry and sharp, cutting across the sand like blades. He set down his pack, pulled out a water flask, and tilted it toward her lips. She turned her face slightly, not in refusal, but in confusion. He spoke softly like one does to a wounded bird. "It's okay, it's clean." A few drops touched her lips, and her throat moved weakly as she swallowed. Her body trembled just from that small act. He watched her closely. Her alien features were strange but not ugly. The way her skin glowed faintly under the fading sunlight made her look like a dying ember. There was something noble about her, even in this broken state. "You don't have to say anything," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He reached into his pack again and pulled out a heat wrap. He wrapped it around her thin frame, hoping to stop the shaking. The stars were starting to appear now, one by one in the purple sky. She looked up at him, blinking slowly. Her lips parted, but again, no sound came. He wasn't sure if she was mute or just too weak to speak, maybe both. The silence between them grew, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full of things, unspoken questions. Warnings, gratitude, maybe even fear. She didn't trust him yet. That much was clear. He didn't blame her. She had been left in chains, left to die, by people she probably once trusted. He had seen betrayal before, but never like this. He sat nearby, back to the rock, eyes scanning the horizon. Something about this girl felt bigger than just a rescue. He had heard rumors lately about missions gone wrong, secret deals, missing soldiers. Maybe she was part of that. He thought about asking her questions. "Where are you from? Why were you chained? Who did this?" But the words died before they reached his tongue. She wouldn't answer. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Instead, he watched the night creep in. The desert made everything silent. No birds, no insects, just wind and shadows. He kept his rifle close, just in case. She stirred again, this time with effort. Her hand reached weakly toward her side. He noticed a small glowing device half buried in the sand. She looked at it, then at him, and shook her head slowly, fear in her eyes. He picked it up carefully, turning it over. It wasn't human tech, not anything he had seen before. He reached to hand it to her, but she shook her head again, more firmly this time. Whatever it was, she didn't want him touching it. He laid it gently on the ground, away from both of them. Her hand dropped, and she closed her eyes once more. He realized something, then she hadn't just been abandoned. She had been discarded like trash, and yet someone still wanted her found. Maybe that device was a tracker, maybe a warning. Either way, he knew one thing for sure: whoever left her behind wasn't finished yet. He stared into the darkness and felt the weight of his choice pressing on him. He could walk away while she slept and pretend this never happened. Or he could stay, protect her, and get pulled into something far bigger than himself. He didn't know what she was, or what kind of fire he had just walked into. But he had already seen the chains, already heard the silence of her pain. He couldn't unsee it now, couldn't ignore it. And so, as the cold wind howled and the stars blinked above, he made his choice. He would stay, even if it meant dying for someone he didn't even know. The silence broke with a sharp sound in the distance, a metal clink, then another. The human's eyes snapped open, his hand already on his weapon. He had heard that sound before, boots on loose rocks. And they weren't his. She was still asleep, or maybe too weak to move. But her eyes opened slowly, and he saw the fear return like a shadow across her face. She knew what that sound meant. She had heard it before, right before they left her in chains. He pressed his finger to his lips. A quiet signal. She gave the smallest nod, barely visible, but enough. He slipped behind a low dune and scanned the dark. Figures moved at the ridge. 3 of them, maybe more. They weren't searching, they were tracking. They knew exactly where to look. He cursed under his breath, gripping his rifle tighter. They must have followed her signal, or maybe they'd been watching all along. She tried to sit up, her limbs shaking like brittle branches. He rushed back to her and helped her onto her feet. She leaned on him heavily, barely able to stand. But her eyes were clear now. She didn't want to be left behind again. He wrapped her arm over his shoulder and they moved, one step at a time through the dark. Each footfall sank into soft dust, muffled and slow. But behind them, the boots came closer, louder, faster. A shot rang out, striking the rock just inches from their heads. He pulled her down behind a slope as more blasts lit up the night. She clutched his arm tightly, her breath fast and shallow. He whispered, "We need to run." And she nodded without a word. They crawled along the ground, low and quiet. He led her toward a narrow gap between boulders, an old mine path maybe. Another blast hit near them, sending sparks and dust into the air. She cried out softly, her leg grazed by debris. He didn't stop. He picked her up again. Ignoring the pain in his own legs, he ran with her, past sharp rocks and dead machines. They didn't fire again, maybe afraid of damaging something important. As he turned the corner of the pass, he spotted a half-buried structure, metal, rusted, but strong. He kicked at the side panel until it gave way and pulled her inside. He slammed the door shut behind them, breathing hard. For a moment, all was quiet. She lay on the ground, her chest rising and falling fast. He knelt beside her, checking the cut on her leg. It wasn't deep, but she had lost more blood than she could afford. He tore a strip from his own shirt and tied it around her leg to stop the bleeding. She looked at him with wide, tired eyes. She mouthed something he couldn't hear. He leaned closer, and she whispered one word. "Why?" It wasn't just a question. It was a wound deeper than any cut. Why was he helping her? Why didn't he run like everyone else? Why did a stranger fight for someone left to die? He didn't have an answer she'd understand, so he said the truth. "Because you don't deserve to be hunted." She stared at him, her mouth trembling, then looked away. The weight of everything she had lost pressed down on her again. But this time, she wasn't alone beneath it. Outside, the hunters moved past the rocks, searching still, but they didn't find the entrance. Not yet. The human checked his weapon, counting each charge left. Not enough for a fight, not against trained killers. He looked back at her, now resting against the wall. She had fallen asleep again, but her face was calm for the first time. He watched her breathe and felt something stir in him, a mix of anger and protectiveness, dangerous but strong. Whatever she had been before, whatever secrets she carried, she wasn't just some mission or enemy. She was alive, afraid, and abandoned, and somehow she was his responsibility now. The wind outside screamed like a warning. The night was far from over, and the real danger hadn't even started. But inside that broken metal shelter, a strange peace settled over them. They had survived this far, together, and tomorrow they would escape again. Not just from the hunters, but from the past that had nearly broken her, and the future that would test them both. The night stretched on like it would never end. Inside the broken shelter, the human sat with his back to the wall, weapon across his lap. He hadn't slept, not really, only drifted in and out with one eye open. Every creak of metal or gust of wind made his grip tighten. The alien girl hadn't moved much. She lay wrapped in his heat wrap, arms close to her chest, breathing slow. Sometimes she made small sounds in her sleep. Not words, more like memories. Memories she couldn't shut off, even in dreams. When the first light touched the edge of the desert sky, she stirred, her eyes blinked open, slow and glassy. He offered her water again, and this time, she took it without fear. Her hands still shook, but she drank more. Enough to bring some color back to her skin. The human watched her carefully. He wanted to ask her many things, but he didn't want to push. She was like a glass sculpture with cracks all over. One wrong question, and she might break again. They sat in silence until she suddenly lifted her hand. She pointed to her throat, then her lips, then slowly shook her head. He understood she couldn't speak. Not right now, maybe not ever. He gave a slow nod and looked away. But then her hand moved again, this time toward the ground. With a shaky finger, she began to draw something in. The dust lines, shapes, a pattern. He leaned closer, watching it take form. It looked like a sigil, or maybe a crest. He didn't recognize it, but it meant something to her. Her hand trembled as she finished the final curve. Then she stared at him, waiting. He pointed at the symbol, then at her, raising his eyebrows. She nodded slowly, then placed her palm flat over the drawing. Tears welled up in her eyes, and he understood. It was her past. Her home, maybe even her family, and it was gone like sand in the wind. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Her head bowed, her shoulders shaking silently. She had cried before, but this time it was different, deeper, slower. It wasn't just sadness. It was grief with nowhere to go. He reached out gently, placing a hand on her arm. She didn't pull away. The two of them sat like that for a long moment, a human and an alien. Connected by pain neither could put into words, he stood and walked to the door. Checking the outside, the desert looked quiet, but quiet didn't mean safe. The people chasing her weren't amateurs, they'd come again. He had to find a way to move her, get her somewhere they wouldn't look. When he turned back, she was holding the strange device again, the one she had feared the night before, but now she seemed calmer. Like she had made a decision. She held it out to him. Slowly, offering it, he hesitated, then took it carefully. The screen lit up, showing strange letters and spinning circles. It began to hum, then beep once soft and low. She nodded, eyes locked on his, then pointed to the symbol she had drawn. It wasn't a tracker, he realized. It was a map, a distress signal, but not to her old team. To someone else. Someone she believed might still help. Maybe another survivor. Maybe family. Maybe a friend. The device blinked a single red dot far from their location. He didn't recognize the name of the place, but the direction was clear. It would take 2 days by foot, maybe more. No roads, no cover, just open land and danger. She stood slowly, one hand against the wall for balance. Her legs were weak, but her face was stronger now. There was something fierce in her expression, something he hadn't seen before, the will to keep going, even if it hurt. He slung his pack over his shoulder and nodded. No words were needed. They were both broken, both hunted, but they were not alone anymore. As they stepped out of the shelter into the light, a gust of warm wind hit their faces. She turned to look at him, and for the first time, she smiled, just a little but real, and in that small moment, he knew he had made the right choice. Whatever this journey was, wherever it ended, he was going with her. They walked slowly at first. Side by side, she still limped, and he adjusted his pace to match hers. Above them, the twin suns began to rise, painting the sand gold and white. Behind them, the shelter faded into the heat, and ahead, the unknown waited. But with each step, they left behind a little fear, a little silence, and maybe, just maybe, a little piece of the chains that once held them both down. The sand wasn't quiet anymore. Something was out there. The human felt it in the way the wind shifted, in the way the birds stopped flying. Even the girl felt it. Her head would turn suddenly, eyes scanning the dunes. She knew they were being watched. They had traveled for hours since dawn. He kept track of direction using an old wrist compass. She followed without needing words. Their movements were slow but steady, like two shadows across an endless sea of gold. At first, it had felt like hope, that signal she gave him, that red blinking dot. It had meant something. But now, he started to wonder if someone else had seen it too. Maybe that signal was a beacon for more than just help. She stumbled again, her legs still weak. He caught her and helped her sit on a flat stone. He handed her water, and she took it, drinking slow. Then she looked up and suddenly pointed straight toward the ridge behind them. He followed her hand with his eyes. At first he saw nothing, then a flicker, a glint of metal, just for a second before it vanished. His heart sank. They weren't alone. Someone was tracking them, not fast, but close enough to strike. He checked his weapon, counted what little power it had left. Not enough, not for a real fight. He turned to her, lowering his voice. "We need to move fast." She nodded. already standing despite the pain. There was no time to rest now. They left the rock and began climbing the hill ahead. The air grew hotter, and each breath felt like fire. But behind them, the wind carried a low sound like the steady beat of boots. The kind that never stopped, never rushed, just followed. They reached the top of the ridge and looked down far. Below was a narrow canyon, half buried by sand and rubble. Old ruins, maybe a mining station, maybe older than that. It didn't matter, it was cover. He helped her down the slope, holding her hand tightly. The rocks scraped their boots, and loose sand threatened to slide beneath them. But they made it to the bottom and rushed into the dark remains of the ruined station. Broken beams and shattered walls offered little protection, but it was better than nothing. She crouched low, pressing her back to the wall. He did the same across from her, watching the canyon entrance. The sound of footsteps grew clearer now. Closer, not one person, two, maybe three. She reached into her suit and pulled out a small blade. He was surprised, but she held it steady with trembling fingers. Her eyes met his, calm but tired. She would fight if she had to, even with her body falling apart. Then something moved at the canyon mouth. A tall figure stepped into view, covered in dark armor with a glowing visor. Another followed, smaller but fast. And then a third, hooded, carrying a strange scanning device. The human cursed under his breath, bounty hunters. They weren't soldiers, they were worse. Paid trackers who never stopped until they got what they came for. The hooded one swept the scanner left and right. It beeped faintly, glowing brighter as it pointed toward the ruins. They were being hunted like animals. He looked at the alien girl, her breath calm now, her hand ready. Suddenly, the scanner gave a sharp tone. The hunter turned toward the ruin wall, lifting his weapon. Before the shot could fire, the human rolled out, raised his rifle, and shot first. The bolt hit the scanner, shattering it with a burst of sparks. The other two reacted fast, raising weapons and shouting orders. The girl leaped from her cover and slashed at the nearest one. Her blade sank deep into the armor seam, and the hunter screamed. She moved like fire, fast and wild, like she was born for this. He covered her, shooting at the third one who tried to flank. A blast hit the wall near his head, and he ducked just in time. The fight was short, brutal, and silent again. Just as quickly, two hunters lay still, and the third had run back into the canyon. The human looked at her, his hands shaking, chest rising and falling fast. She stood tall now, eyes sharp, body swaying slightly from exhaustion. But there was strength in her again. Something had awakened inside her. She dropped the blade and fell to her knees, breathing hard. He rushed to her, holding her shoulders. She looked up at him, and for the first time, her lips moved with sound. "They won't stop," she whispered, voice broken but real. He nodded slowly. "I won't stop either," he said. She closed her eyes just for a moment, and leaned her head against his chest. They didn't know who else would come, or how long they could run. But now they were no longer prey. They were survivors, and maybe something more. The night was darker than before, stars hidden behind thick clouds. The air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. They had found shelter again, but this time, the silence was different. It was tense, waiting, as if the shadows themselves were watching. The human kept his rifle close, eyes scanning every corner. The alien girl sat quietly, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the ground. She was no longer the weak girl in chains. Something had changed. A fire burned beneath her skin, slow and steady. Suddenly, a soft hum filled the air. Not from any machine he knew. It came from her. Or maybe from the device she had given him. The glowing bracelet on her wrist pulsed faintly, lighting her pale skin. Her eyes snapped open, wide and fierce. She stood slowly, muscles tense. The human felt a chill run down his spine. This was no longer the girl he had rescued. This was a warrior awakened. From the dark, a figure stepped forward. Cloaked in shadows, the bounty hunter who had chased them, more dangerous than before. His weapon raised, ready to fire. But before he could pull the trigger, she moved. Her hands glowed with strange light, a power ancient and deadly. She shouted words in a language the human did not understand, and suddenly, the hunter's weapon froze mid-air. Locked by invisible chains, she stepped closer, eyes burning, her voice calm but filled with strength. "You will not harm us," she said. The hunter struggled, eyes wide with shock. He dropped his weapon. Falling to his knees, the human watched, heart pounding. He had never seen anything like this. Her power was beyond anything he had imagined. She wasn't just a victim, she was a force of nature. She turned to him, a small, tired smile breaking through the fire. "We are safe for now," she said. He nodded, still catching his breath. The chains were gone, not just the ones on her wrists, but the chains of fear and silence too. Outside, the storm began to rise, winds howling like wild beasts. They knew more danger was coming. But together, they stood ready, stronger, freer, and more alive than ever before. The dawn was strange that day, the sky painted with colors no human had names for. She stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the ship come down, the same ship that once held her chains, her prison, her past. Her companions had returned, strong, proud, demanding. They expected her to kneel, to obey, to leave with them. But she did not move. Her eyes met the humans, steady and sure. They spoke. Without words, he had fought beside her, bled beside her. He had given her freedom when no one else would. Now, she was ready to choose. The ship's ramp lowered with a hiss. Voices called out, orders barked, but she turned away, stepping closer to the human. Her hand reached for his, fingers brushing. "I am not going back," she said softly, voice clear and strong. "No more chains, no more silence." The commander shouted, but she did not listen. Her future was here, beside the man who had freed her. They walked away from the ship together, into the unknown. But with hope burning bright, the chains were broken forever, and a new story had just begun.